Shaking up the status quo. Right here on the Michelangelo Signorile Show.
This weekend, we saw New York Democrats release a redistricting map. Big pickups possible for Democrats in the state. It was something we knew was coming, and nonetheless, it's great to see how it played out, and then to look at how this plays out for Democrats nationally. David Neer, who's political director with Daily Kos and helps run Daily Kos elections, joins me to talk about it. Welcome back to the program, David.
Mike, a pleasure to be back. Good topic to talk about.
Yeah, so the commission that New Yorkers had voted for to redraw the maps got bogged down and couldn't come up with anything because it's split between Democrats and Republicans. And so this went to the legislature, which was a great thing because the Democrats run the legislature, have control of both chambers of the legislature, and Governor Kathy Hochul has indicated she would sign what they come up with. Talk a little bit about what happened on Sunday and what they've put forth.
Absolutely. First, Mike, let me preface by saying something that the Democratic Party as a whole has taken a very strong and clear stance against partisan political gerrymandering, so much so that they've proposed legislation in Washington, D.C. that would outlaw it nationwide on the congressional level. Every Democrat supports this bill. Every Republican opposes it. So when we talk about maps like the one coming out of New York that was created by Democrats that are, no question about it, it's a gerrymander. And when we say anything praiseworthy about that, the reason why we're doing so is because we don't believe in unilateral disarmament, and we simply can't engage in unilateral disarmament. Republicans in states across the country are putting in place extreme gerrymanders, and Democrats have to fight fire with fire. If Republicans want to end gerrymandering, hey, I got a great solution for them. They can sign on to the bills that Democrats are proposing in Congress that would end it once and for all. But that's obviously not going to happen. So let's then drill down and talk about what Democrats are doing, like I said, to fight fire with fire in New York. You mentioned that they control both chambers of the legislature, and the governor is also a Democrat, Kathy Hochul. And so that means Democrats can pretty much pass whatever map they like. And the map that they proposed would pretty radically change the configuration of the state's congressional delegation. Right now, New York has 27 seats. It's going to drop one to 26 because it lost a seat in reapportionment. The current delegation has 19 Democrats and 8 Republicans. If things go according to plan, then the new map would slice that Republican delegation in half to 4, and Democrats would pick up 3 seats. So it would go from 19-8 in favor of Democrats to 22-4 in favor of Democrats. And on the margins, that would be a net swing of 7 seats. And that's a lot when you have such a closely divided House.
And to point out further, this wasn't as aggressive as the DCCC and others had hoped for or had wanted. The legislature did decide, and probably strategically, to not do it so aggressively so that they could also withstand what might be a red wave as well. In other words, making these districts bluer than blue enough to withstand a red wave, I guess.
Yeah, I think that's right. There are always parochial political considerations in redistricting as well. As much as a lot of partisan operatives, myself included, would love to see Democrats really go to the mat and try to maximize their gains, there are existing incumbents and members of the legislature who all have various interests and goals and aims and are often unwilling to give up the territory necessary to make other districts more winnable for Democrats. All that said, I think that Democrats actually did a creditable job here. I think they left very little on the table. You mentioned what the plan the DCCC was pushing for. That might have been a 23-3 map instead of the 22-4 map. And yeah, those 2 net seats, that could make a difference given, like I said, how closely divided Congress is, except as you point out, if you overextend yourself, then you can set yourself up for failure in a difficult year. And November is looking pretty difficult. So I think that what Democrats did was pretty smart. We'll see more analysis in the coming days and how things shake out. But on the whole, if you are a progressive partisan, I think you're probably going to be pretty happy with what's about to come.
And we should also point out, before talking about what's happening elsewhere, that New York had, or as it exists now, it had been gerrymandered in favor of the Republicans, or at least gerrymandered in a way to hinder Democrats in a state that's largely Democratic.
That's such an excellent point, because 10 years ago, the current map was drawn by a federal court. And so I wouldn't call it gerrymandered, except I would say that it certainly wasn't a map that favored Democrats by any stretch, and it wasn't drawn by them. And you alluded to that redistricting commission that failed to complete its work. That commission, I think, gets badly misunderstood. I think that the word commission sometimes brings up this idea of, independent, nonpartisan, careful map makers putting aside political considerations, but that wasn't the case here at all. This was really an effort by Andrew Cuomo and the Republicans to give the GOP a veto power over redistricting in the state of New York. And the fact is, the state just became too blue. Democrats won supermajorities in the legislature. And this is the reality that they're facing now. It was pretty much a sham commission, so much so, in fact, they wanted to call themselves the Independent Redistricting Commission. When the measure went on the ballot a number of years ago, a judge said, no, you're not independent at all. You can't use that word in the ballot description. That's totally misleading.
So looking at other states, I was reading a Washington Post report that more than 24 maps passed around the country. And those states, Democrats would net an additional 5 districts that Joe Biden would have won in 2020. Then looking at the New York map, I guess it would bring that up to 8. And as we're looking at redistricting and what Republicans are hoping for to gain back the House, where does it put Democrats right now as you're seeing what Republicans have done, which is very radical?
So I would caution that there are still a number of states left to go, including one of the big ones, Florida, which is in the middle of a huge internal GOP civil war. And we can get into that in a bit if you'd like. But right now, I think that there has been this tendency to say, oh, well, redistricting wasn't really as bad for Democrats as a lot of people thought, or it's actually gone kind of well for Democrats. Like I said, first off, we're not done. Second off, as we've been talking about, this is going to be a typical midterm. And in a typical midterm environment, the electorate tends to swing against whichever party it is that controls the White House. We, of course, saw that in 2018 with the blue wave. And so if you're just looking at the raw top line numbers and you see Biden won a particular district by 5, 6, 7, 8 points, that's the kind of district that could easily go the other way in a difficult midterm election. So I'm by no means ready to count any chickens. And the other thing that I want to point out about some of these maps, and particularly the one that Republicans passed in Texas, they passed, in a number of cases, defensive gerrymanders. What I mean by that is, instead of trying to flip Democratic-held districts, they took competitive or potentially competitive seats held by Republicans and took them off the playing field. So there might have been just saying, for example, a district that Joe Biden won by 5 points. Instead, now it's a district that Trump won by 15 points. Forget about it for Democrats. And they did that to at least 10 or a dozen districts. In Texas, they've done that in other states as well. So when you're counting the number of net gains and losses, you also have to look at what are the opportunities out there? And is the playing field getting smaller? And in a lot of cases, especially in Texas, it is.
When we also then look at states where we've seen judges step in and say, no, the Republican Party has completely, wrongly gerrymandered the state, particularly Ohio, we just saw. That has to be something that is something Democrats, feel good about moving forward. Of course, they have to worry, I guess, about their own maps, but talk a little bit about that issue.
Absolutely. Ohio's ruling was particularly fortuitous for Democrats. And the reason why I say that is this was handled in the state courts by the state Supreme Court. And that court actually has a 4-3 Republican majority. But the Chief Justice is a pretty moderate, reasonable Republican and sided with pro-democratic plaintiffs in this case to say that what the GOP had drawn there, both the congressional maps and the legislative maps, was a total violation of the state constitution. And she was quite angry, along with the Democratic members of the court. And one very good thing also is that a ruling by a state Supreme Court, generally speaking, can't be appealed to the United States Supreme Court. There was also a favorable ruling in Alabama, favorable for Democrats. That would go on appeal to the Supreme Court, which could, of course, overturn it. So far the outcomes in the courts have been positive, but it's never something you can really rely on because you could find yourself in a state or drawing a judge that is a total hardcore Trumper who doesn't really care at all about gerrymandering, is a partisan GOP hack, and the next set of cases might not turn out as well.
And getting back to New York, then. How does New York's map look as Republicans are, of course, vowing to take this to court and saying that this is completely unconstitutional and blah, blah, blah?
The big difference between New York and Ohio is that New York's constitution doesn't say the same things that Ohio's does. The cases in Ohio that wound up striking down the congressional map there specifically relied on provisions of the state constitution that we don't have here in New York. I'm from New York myself. So I think that creates a great deal of difficulty. The courts in New York, the entire top court here, we call it the Court of Appeals is our top court, all Democratic appointees. It's probably pretty unlikely that the state courts would have a problem with the map, or at least if they do have a problem with the map, they might say, we don't like this map, but there's nothing we can do about it. And as for the federal courts, we saw what Republicans have reaped. The United States Supreme Court emphatically said that federal courts cannot hear cases alleging that a map is a partisan gerrymander. They said we won't rule on those. Those are only a matter for the state courts. And so Republicans will have absolutely no luck in federal court, and it's because of the Supreme Court that they created.
So speaking as New Yorkers, as I am too, and as somebody who grew up on Staten Island, it was delightful to see that Staten Island has now been expanded, its district, to include Sunset Park, Gowanus, and Park Slope. I guess it went from a +12 Trump district to a Biden +9. Curious about Max Rose, who won in 2018 in the blue wave, and did he won fairly well by a few points, only to lose in 2020 when Trump won. But he kind of, he didn't go in lockstep with the Democrats, knowing he had this Trump base. Now he's running again, but he's going to have to run with constituents who are much more progressive, certainly in Brooklyn. What are your thoughts on that?
That's definitely an interesting race. Like you said, Rose had to cultivate this moderate profile to win what was ultimately a Trumpy district. And now that district shifted by about 20 points to the left, or I should say it will shift. The legislature is likely to vote this week, and Hochul's likely to sign the map soon, but nothing's a done deal as yet. So Rose is back for a rematch against Nicole Maliotakis, who defeated him. I suppose it's very possible that he could face a primary with a more progressive candidate who has the ability to really make him sweat. I don't think he can take the nomination for granted. especially that it's not just that there are all these new voters; it's that there are all these new voters in the Democratic primary in that district, and he may have to find himself making accommodations and moving to the left. So we'll see how that one unfolds. There's still a while before the filing deadline. The primary is not till the middle of the year. But Rose is also he's a pretty canny politician. So I expect that he knows everything that you and I have just said right now.
Well, and as I tweeted over the weekend, I can't wait to see Nicole Maliotakis, a total Trumper. Well, she's kind of been all over the place, but is now a total Trumper, campaigning in Park Slope, which will be something interesting to see. It's so great, as always, David, to get your insights. Thanks so much for coming on today.
Always a pleasure, Mike.
David Neer, political director at Daily Kos. Follow him on Twitter at David Neer, N-I-R. We're back in a few minutes.
Michelangelo Signorile on Sirius XM.